Hi, my name is Caroline, and I'm making a series of videos that discuss some of the basic concepts of flying an aircraft. I'm in the process of getting my private pilot's license, and going into it, I really didn't know what to expect at all. What you learn, how to even fly a plane, had no idea. So I thought some people might be interested in knowing the concepts we learn on a weekly basis. So today I'm going to talk about the most basic aspect of flying, which is actually controlling the aircraft. So unlike a car, which only has one axis of control, which is vertical or turning left and right, in a plane you have to control three, which is vertical, longitudinal, and lateral. You can imagine the vertical axis as a pole that goes through the roof of the plane to the ground while the plane turns around it. Controlling the plane in relation to this axis means the nose of the plane can go left or right. Like in a car, that's how you steer. In a plane, this movement is referred to as yawing. And this movement is controlled by the rudder pedals, which are located where your feet sit when you're in the pilot seat. Pressing the left rudder pedal makes the rudder turn left, and pressing the right rudder pedal makes the rudder turn right. You use this to steer the plane while it's on the ground, but it's not used to steer the plane in the air. Yawing just helps coordinate the turn, so it's a lot smoother. Planes actually change direction by controlling its bank angle or moving the plane along the longitudinal axis. You can imagine this as a pole that goes through the front of the plane where the propeller is towards the back of the plane where the tail is. You can't control this in a car unless you speed around a turn and your car flips over. But in a plane, all you have to do is move the yoke, which is basically the plane's steering wheel. If you move the yoke to the right, it raises the right aileron, which is a flap on the plane wing, and that makes the plane wing lower and makes the plane move in that direction. And the same occurs if you move the yoke to the left. The final axis the plane can rotate around is the lateral, or a pole that goes from one wingtip to the other. Controlling the plane around this axis controls the pitch, or whether the nose is pointing up or down. You can control this by moving the yoke backwards, which raises the elevator, which is a flap on the tail of the plane, which makes the nose rise. The opposite occurs if you push the yoke forward, which causes the elevator to lower, which causes the nose to lower. On the elevator is something called the trim tab, which is a flap on a flap, basically. This slightly changes the lift of the airplane, and if properly set, the plane should fly completely straight and level. Setting the trim properly relieves a lot of the pressures of flying and makes flying much easier. So instead of having to fight and to hold the controls back to get the pitch you want, if the trim is set properly, you barely have to touch the plane. Flying planes shouldn't require a lot of emphasized movements, and only slight corrections should be made. So if you're constantly trying to adjust the pitch and you're constantly putting pressure on the controls in either direction, something's wrong with the trim. Knowing if the plane is trimmed properly is actually pretty easy and only requires knowing what to feel for with the controls. So for instance, if you're applying a lot of backwards pressure on the yoke, you should know that trimming the plane to have the nose at a higher angle of attack would be the next necessary step to make it easier. Visual flying requires the pilot to know how the plane is supposed to feel, sound, and respond. This is called controlling the plane by the feel, or flying the airplane without depending on the controls. There are several things a pilot can learn about the plane and about how they're flying just by using his or her senses. For instance, G-loads. G-loads are a pilot's response to the forces of acceleration in a plane and are a good indicator of what's going on with your controls. So for instance, if a pilot successfully does a coordinated turn, the pilot should feel a centripetal force pushing them into their seat. And if the turn is uncoordinated, which means more rudder should be used, or yawing, this is when yawing comes in handy, then the pilot would feel a radial force, which would be pushing them to the side, like in a car. If you're turning around a corner, you feel pushed to the side, not into the center of your seat. Sounds are a good indicator for airspeed, since every airspeed has a different tone. Experienced pilots can tell what RPM they're at just by listening, but an easy indicator is if the sound is increasing, that usually means the airspeed is increasing too. Most pilots can tell the difference between cruise flight, a climb, or a dive just based on the noise level and pitch. Airspeed can also be indicated by the response of the controls, and specifically the yoke and rudder. If the airstream is fast, the controls are more rigid but respond to smaller movements. If the airstream is slow, the controls move more easily but require a lot more pressure for results. Bank and pitch can also be determined by the pilot just by looking outside, or more specifically, looking at where the plane is in relation to the horizon. All these things are called VFR flying or visual flight rules flying, and it means you fly the plane without depending on the instruments. I'm going to get into the details of what to look for VFR flying in the next video, but basically it's a really important skill for most pilots to have because instruments can fail and they're not that great to depend on. It's actually recommended that only about 10% of your attention is inside the cockpit when flying VFR, because the most common error student pilots make is to make pitch or bank corrections or speed corrections based on the instruments, and what happens is they chase the instruments. Things like instrument lag and gyroscopic precession confuse the pilot into making excessive corrections, and then they need more corrections to fix the corrections, and it takes too long. So VFR flying is something every pilot should know how to do, and is easy once you get the hang of it and you know what to look for. So that's all I'm going to cover for today. Thanks for watching, and check back to see some of the other videos I'm going to make, which include the basics of straight and level flight or VFR flying, instruments, landing and takeoff, and possibly some basic aerodynamics. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope to be making more soon. Thanks. Hi, my name is Caroline Lasserson, and I'm making a few videos that discuss some of the basic information you have to know to get your private pilot's license. In my last video, I discussed the basics of controlling the aircraft, and today I'm going to talk about applying that knowledge to perform straight and level flight and VFR flying. Basically, all flight maneuvers like turns, landings, and takeoffs are just deviations from this fundamental operation. When getting your VFR or Visual Flight Rules license, one of the first things you learn how to do is maintain straight and level flight. VFR flying means you fly the airplane without depending on the instruments, and you fly by mainly looking outside to see where your aircraft is positioned in relation to the horizon. When you look outside the windshield, you can see the top of the nose of the plane is a couple of inches below the horizon. If this distance becomes smaller, the pilot knows the plane is ascending, and if this distance becomes larger, the pilot knows the plane is descending. Maintaining level flight is accomplished by knowing what this gap is supposed to look like by cross-checking with the instruments. Bank angles can be seen when the horizon is perpendicular to a certain place on the nose. It changes from plane to plane, and even if you're turning left or right, but with practice it becomes easier to know where the horizon is supposed to be positioned. Straight flight is when the nose of the plane is completely parallel with the horizon, but because the nose is not really a wide reference point, it's difficult to tell whether the plane is slightly banked to one side or not. Looking out the left and right windows and seeing where the wingtips are in relation to the horizon can also determine bank angles, and it's generally easier to notice. If the wingtips are an equal distance from the horizon, then the plane is flying straight, and if one is closer to the horizon and one's farther than the horizon, then you know the plane is banked to the left or to the right. The horizon-nose relationship is also helpful for heading. Just choose a spot on the horizon, note where it is in relationship to the nose, and make sure it stays in the same place. This helps you maintain a direction without constantly checking the compass. Slight changes in the visual perspective can actually equal big changes overall. So what looks like a couple of centimeter change in the gap between the nose and the horizon can actually translate into a 100-foot change in altitude. Also, airspeed affects the angle of attack and therefore changes the visual picture. That's why it's important for the students to not be constantly moving the controls, and only slight corrections should be made when necessary. Trim helps relieve the pilot of continuous control input and makes flying much easier and less exhausting. Like straight and level flight, level turns are also an important concept for VFR flying. Once a pilot has the basics of straight and level flight, the next step is learning how to execute a turn. All four controls on the plane are used to perform a level turn. These are the ailerons, the elevator, the throttle, and the rudder. The aileron banks the wings at a specific angle. The elevator moves the nose of the plane up or down to adjust the pitch. The throttle provides the thrust and helps tighten the turn, and the rudder is used to make the nose move in the direction of the turn and offset the yaw effect, which makes the turn uncoordinated. All turns should be coordinated. The yaw effect makes the plane yaw in the direction of the lifted wing or the opposite direction of the turn. This is because the lifted wing produces more drag. Using the rudder counteracts this response, and if done correctly, the pilot should feel a force pushing them straight down into their seat. And the ball and the turn and slip indicator should be centered. If the turn is uncoordinated, the plane either slips or skids. During a slip, the plane is yawing opposite of the turning path. So for instance, during a right turn, the pilot would feel a force pushing them right or to the inside of the turn, and the ball in the turn and slip indicator would be to the far right. To correct this would require more right rudder. During a skid, the plane is yawing too much along the turning path. During a right turn, the pilot would feel a force pushing them to the left or to the outside of the turn, and the ball in the turn and slip indicator would be to the far left. To correct this would require less rudder pressure. There are a few general VFR rules a pilot can remember that makes responding to the turns easy. So if the nose starts to move before the turn starts, the rudder is being applied too soon. If the turn starts before the nose starts turning, the rudder is being applied too late. And if the nose moves up or down when entering a turn, the pilot is either applying too much or too little elevator pressure. There are three types of basic turns: shallow turns, medium turns, and steep turns. Shallow turns are less than 20 degrees of bank. At this turn degree, the airplane bank is so shallow that the plane wants to become level again to maintain stability unless some aileron pressure is applied to maintain the bank angle. Medium turns are between 20 and 45 degrees of bank. At this turn degree, the airplane is stable and remains at a constant bank. Past 30 degrees, altitude tends to be lost, and it's important to maintain a constant pitch angle by applying slight back pressure to the elevator. Steep turns are more than 45 degrees of bank. At this turn degree, the airplane has an overbanking tendency that causes the airplane to overcome stability and increase the bank angle unless aileron pressure is applied to keep the plane at a constant turn rate. For all bank angles, rollout must be started before reaching the desired heading. The amount of lead necessary is depending on the angle, and generally the lead is 1/2 of the degree of bank. So for instance, if the bank is 40 degrees, begin rolling out at 20 degrees before your desired heading. Another important factor to consider when performing a level turn is the horizontal lift component. There are two rules to remember. The rate of any turn at any airspeed increases as the bank angle increases, and the rate of any turn at any bank angle decreases as the speed increases. So that's all I'm going to talk about for VFR flying, straight and level flying, and level turns. Thanks for watching, and please check back to see more videos. Bye!